Welcome everyone to the second video of the Rust GUI wars, and today we have possibly the most interesting showdown in the Rust web framework world, Leptos versus Dioxus. Introducing Leptos, a framework that I used earlier this year in a short video where I created a calculator of sorts, and has continued to amaze me ever since. Being based on the high standards set by Solid.js, Leptos manages to stay very quick and reactive, and it does it in a very intuitive manner. Of course, it supports building to web and even desktop applications with a little bit of assistance through Tauri. Also, unlike Dioxus, Leptos ensures that you can pick between using Arctics and Axum for server-side rendering. Additionally, Leptos has support for modern-day dev tools like Tailwind CSS. Truly an impressive framework. Next we have Dioxus, a blazing fast web framework that actually takes its influence from Svelte and React, while still managing to perform better than Leptos. Dioxus actually supports quite a few more platforms than Leptos, such as desktop, iOS and Android, and lastly, it ventures into the world of cross-platform TUIs, which is a first for a web framework in this series, in fact any framework in this series. However, server-side rendering, it only supports Arctics, but it still supports Tailwind CSS for those wondering. Now, if you look at some Leptos and Dioxus code side by side, you may notice that Dioxus uses its own DSL that differs from traditional HTML. I personally tend to actually like Dioxus's approach that stays more true to form for Rust. And not only that, but Dioxus allows use of the Rust's own statements for conditionals and for iteration, which is a nice extra touch, and which I greatly prefer to Leptos' solution here, which is how you do conditionals using the show statement, and for iteration using this for statement. And it's definitely slightly more confusing for beginners. Next, as we run our applications here, okay, let's try that again. Next, as we run our applications here, right, okay, and funny enough, all of these ports are taken. 1 second. Okay, now that port should be open and I should be able to deobserve. So, as we've run our applications, currently they are looking kind of similar, but you can see that Leptos has this kind of sidebar that just has more information, which is really important. You can still see your build information and go through it and all of that, which it does keeps the basics of the regular cargo output, but really does add a layer on top of it, specifically for Dioxus and for its needs. And also, one of the greatest things, if I hit R, it will hot reload, which is really nice. If I try hitting R here, it's just going to write it to terminal, and that's really unfortunate. And it's kind of a bit of an underwhelming display from Leptos. And pretty cool Dioxus having your own CLI tool, specifically fit for your use case. Anyways, for the creation period of today's video, I went back to basics with an evolution from to-do applications, which are common first creation when learning frameworks like these ones. So my evolution would be a habit counter, where an individual could add a habit, and then every time they did that habit, they could hit a button and increment the amount of times they did it. I'd also keep track of how many times they did it on that particular day, and a total count. And this idea is a great test case for these frameworks, as they can put iteration and reactivity to their max while still not taking ages to complete. A necessity, mostly because I'd spent way too much time procrastinating on other projects, games, other stuff. Okay, here are the side-by-side applications. To the left we have the Leptos contender, and to the right we have Dioxus's. So, firstly, the whole idea of the application is that you can increment the amount of times you've done a certain hobby. This is just test data. Don't mind how conspicuous it is. But you can add a new habit. I don't know. Alt CD. Let's use actual good test data. As you can see, on the first day you add it, the second value is the amount of times you've done it today, and the first value is the amount of times you've done it overall. And they'll match up on the first day, but this is some test data from yesterday. So you see, it's going to keep track of how many times it was done today, how many times you've done it overall. And here we have the Dioxus application, same concept, and we can add a new habit, or do the same thing. And funnily enough, all of their data is stored. So if I refresh these applications, you can see comes back with the exact same information I have before. And we're just using WebSys and the browser local storage to do that. And it's the same application on both ones. In fact, they use the exact same CSS file. And you may notice that there's some slight differences. I'm not sure what that comes down to. I'm not sure what exactly that comes down to. It's just like each framework interprets it slightly differently, or maybe they're built slightly differently. But you'll get to the code just about now. So here we have the code to both applications. In fact, to make it slightly easier, let me just swap the sides. So to the left, we still have Leptos, and to the right, we have Dioxus again. So, as you can see, slightly different approaches when it comes to the DSR. Here, we can use actual raster statements, whilst here we have to use this show block. And it is easier inside of Dioxus, obviously, and you still get the same reactiveness to the application. In fact, it feels like the applications I built were more stable with Dioxus than with Leptos, and it's probably because I'm like bad at this and I had to make some compromises. So funny enough, both applications use the same helper script, and this is just where all of the habit code is stored, and it's exactly the same on both frameworks, except I did change one side thing because I was kind of stupid and decided to use a vector instead of a hash map for the habits, which was definitely a dumb decision. Hash maps were definitely the way to go. Inside of the Dioxus version, I did end up just using the index to find the object. But here I had to use the actual title and find it. So if we go back here, the script itself doesn't change, the output script doesn't change. But here to get the index, I created a new function called find habit object that just took in the object and found which one it was based off of its title, which is definitely the dumber way of doing it. You should just use a hash map. But anyways, I digress. Despite those small differences that just comes down to the way I built this application, you may also notice some smaller differences between these two frameworks. So from the top, we can see the routers of both of these applications. This just distinguishes what pages you should go to depending on the path. And Dioxus's one is just simpler. It really is just simpler. For the same route like this one, it's just that. It really is just that. Whilst with Leptos, you have to have this whole thing here that of course fits it in with its DSL, but this is substantially simpler. I'm gonna be real. However, it's not that big of a difference. Also, you notice that for the links to all of the style sheets and of course Google Fonts, because I did use Poplins for both of these applications, I decided to put that inside of the view function inside of Dioxus. However, in Leptos, if we look more closely, I had to put inside of the index.html. If you did try and use the link function inside of Leptos, inside of its DSL, it just wouldn't work. So I just added it here to the index.html, and it ended up working. And this is where there was a slight issue with the default project from Leptos, where for some reason it wasn't working by default because it had an extra that just wasn't functioning. Another thing you're probably going to notice is like when you're creating signals, here you have the create keyword, here we have the use. It's just slightly different colloquial terms for all hooks inside of Dioxus versus inside of Leptos. The good part is that both frameworks decide to keep it the same. All hooks inside of Dioxus are going to start with use. So you also have stuff like use memo, use route. They used to be use ref, but they got rid of that. And of course, it's still in the official book. Funnily enough, those are actually the major changes between both of these frameworks. They really are very similar. And one more thing, if we actually look at the results for the JS web framework benchmarks, which for some reason also includes all of the Rust web frameworks, we can actually see that Dioxus does better than Leptos, if I can find it. Here we have it, compared to Leptos' score, a little bit further down here. So there are, of course, those differences. Dioxus is faster, is easier to use, is a bit more polished, which is why I personally say it's the better framework. Anyways, on to the next section. Now, let's build a count app using both frameworks. Okay, here we have the code for the Dioxus version of the application, and if you look at it, we have 4 buttons. We have increment, subtract, randomize, and reset. And random, I just have in its own closure here. And funnily enough, with random, what you also need to do is take into account adding the get random crate here with the JS feature when you're trying to use it with Dioxus and wasm build target. It's the crate that it's the low-level crate for rand. Anyways, you also notice that for count, I have to call it, then I have to say toString. I don't know what's that about, but it has to specifically be a string when you're displaying text inside of the inside of Dioxus. In Leptos, you can just have the signal, but it wouldn't work inside of Dioxus. And also, what's nice about Dioxus is that if you are doing a basic function like addition, subtraction, you don't actually have to say like dot set. So I don't have to like count dot set count +1, which you can do if you wanted to, but this just speeds up the process, which is nice. Anyways, let's start the application using the command dxserve, and this is the CLI tool. You can see reload, clear, all of that. Really nice, really well done. And then let's view the application. Here we have our application. Everything rendered as expected because Dioxus doesn't actually have like a default template CSS file really. So just the basic way you'd expect to see it. So minus, subtract, add, subtract, randomize, and then back to 0. Everything's working as planned. Now onto the Leptos version. Okay, here we have the code for the Leptos version. Same setup, 4 buttons: increment, subtract, randomize, and reset. Everything is kind of the same except here, inside of Leptos, I don't think it actually supports saying something like counter plus equals 1. I think that would just error out. So you have to use update, which just allows you to take in a closure with the input being the read-write signals value, and you can just change that. Or if you wanted to, you could do what I demonstrated before, saying counter.set, and then you're getting your counter, and then you're adding 1 to it. And you can do that as well. And yeah, that's basically everything there. Again, I have random in its own closure. And funnily enough, let's run this. You have to use the trunk command to run the CSR application, and it'll open up on that port. So let's go to the application. Okay, here we have the application. So you can see everything is working pretty well. You can add, you can subtract, and you can randomize, and also reset as well. Everything's working fine. So let's go back to the code for a quick second. So here we're back at the code. One other thing I wanted to point out, so on Leptos, you can just have your signal be the input for like a header, or if you want to show any text, and it figures it out. You don't have to call it and then say toString. In fact, I think that might actually break it. So let's go here to styles.css. This is the default CSS file that comes with the template. It's not anything that special. Anyways, I guess let's go on to the next section to the video. Before we start ranking, I just wanted to say that in my experience using Leptos and Dioxus, they're both pretty similar. However, Leptos always decides to take the root of most resistance and create a more complex framework that's more complicated for the sake of being more complicated. Additionally, everything tends to be a bit more fractured when it comes to the CLI tooling with Leptos. Dioxus has this really nice and beginner-friendly experience with Dioxus CLI, whereas with Leptos, I'm juggling between Cargo, Leptos, and Trunk, and not only that, but currently their starter project to set up CSR is broken. and has been for a while according to the date of this open GitHub issue and open GitHub pull request. The first time anyone tries to use Leptos, they're met with errors, which suck. However, despite its issues, Leptos is great, but honestly, Dioxus is just more polished. Finally, it's ranking time, as we get to put each framework on the Rust GUI Wars leaderboard, which you can view in the description below. If you want an overview for each category, check out the inaugural episode for the Rust GUI Wars. Otherwise, let's start with Leptos. For operating system support, I'm giving Leptos a solid 3 out of 5. And it gets its decent mark here, mainly because of Tauri support, but that can only do so much in comparison to other frameworks that we've had, like Iced, and also to Dioxus, which has pretty good support. So 3 out of 5 is decent for Leptos. For tooling, I'm giving Leptos 3 out of 5 again, and it manages to get this mark because it gets the basic right. Decent integration with Rust Analyzer, although it becomes a bit sketchy sometimes when I'm in the view macro. A build system that's fully capable and not infuriating to use once you get the hang of it. Support for Tailwind CSS. It's perfectly average. That's all a framework needs to be. However, if they pull more stuff on the Cargo Leptos, refine it a bit, they will be at the top tier in this category, honestly. For community support and documentation, I have nothing else but to give Leptos a 5 out of 5. It has 500k downloads on Crates.io and an active Discord server with lots of eager people to help you learn the framework. And there's a good split between the crates, which makes docs.rs a little bit of a better resource, plus a well-maintained book that explains all of the important subjects such as async, iteration conditions, all of that type of stuff. So I think Leptos does a really good job and they get all of the boxes for this category and stand out. Well done, Leptos team. For developer experience, they're getting another 3 out of 5. It's pretty average for Leptos. I was personally able to iterate a bit faster than Dioxus. Leptos felt a bit slow, a bit sluggish. That's more of a personal experience. But also, there were issues with hot reloading and trunk, using trunk, where there's no like dedicated key binding for hot reloading. So I couldn't just hit R and it would like hot reload, which it really sucks when you're trying to work with CSS because Rust hot reloading doesn't automatically hot reload when you're using CSS files and when you're editing them. So that was a little bit of an issue. And it kind of, with Leptos, it's a bunch of small issues that build up into building more resentment against Leptos, which is where polish really comes in handy. And Leptos just isn't there in comparison to Dioxus. For theming, I'm going to give a 4 out of 5. I think this is probably going to be the average mark I give web frameworks because it's all really HTML and CSS. If you understand HTML and CSS, you can theme your application website however you want to. And I'm giving it a 4 out of 5 because there's support for Tailwind. Maybe in the future, if there are more tools and stuff, then I'll increase the theming score for web frameworks and all that. Next, we can go to Dioxus. Onto the Dioxus breakdown. Firstly, for OS support, it gets all 5 stars, and it gets all of the marks here because of its support for mobile, web and desktop, and especially mobile is pretty rare in the Rust framework world. And only a few frameworks I found actually have native support for mobile and also publishing to the Play Store and all that. So, nicely played. For tooling, I'm going to give them all 5 stars because the Dioxus team certainly put a lot of effort here. The CLI tool is top tier and above the rest. It's also relatively easy to use, with one command being all you need to create your application from a template, and again, one command to start it up. Also in the creation process, they added a question whether you want to use Tailwind or not. And, unlike in Leptos, where they just let you figure it out on your own, it's very well done, very well polished. Good job, Doc. For community support and documentation, I'm giving Dioxus 2 out of 5. The team certainly have a lot to work towards here, and they're trying, however the basics are just not there yet at the time of recording. It's honestly a first for me to see a framework's official book be 4 versions behind. It's honestly unusable. Basic concepts like iteration, async, and what most beginners actually want to know are nowhere to be seen. The only reason it isn't a 1 or 0 for me is because they're trying to build new documentation on their website, and they also have the help of docs.rs, which is something literally every framework and library has to their disposal. For such a polished framework, it's sad to see that they don't realize the importance of documentation. For developer experience, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. All around, it's an easy, quick framework to use. If you manage to stay past the documentation issues, you will fall in love with Dioxus. Let me be real with you, before this video, I was certain Leptos was better. I wanted it to be better. But now, I have been fully indoctrinated into the Dioxus code. And lastly, for theming, I'm going to give it the same 4 as Leptos, 4 out of 5, has support for Tailwind. Of course, theming all done through HTML and CSS, or its DSL and CSS, so pretty easy to use, good theming all around. Dioxus stole the victory from Leptos in today's video. It provided a slicker, more polished experience, so rightfully it wins with a total of 20 to Leptos' 18, putting it first in the leaderboard above Slint and Ice, and making Leptos tied second with Slint. Both frameworks put up an incredible fight, and I'm sure by the next time I review them, they will be so much better and would have fixed their respective issues. However, in the next episode, we're going to see the clash of a lifetime between two Rust terminal user interface frameworks, Ratatouille versus Cursive.